Hi, everybody. Welcome to Act Now. I'm Julianna Forlano. Guess what? Airport workers are taking action in more than 20 cities across the nation. They got together at airport terminals, the United America and Delta Airlines corporate headquarters, because guess what? They are getting totally screwed by the corporate man. And they are demanding good jobs that provide a living wage. This is all in ActTV's effort to cover labor, which Chris Hedges, guest on this show, and other guests on this show have often said is the only thing, the labor movement, that can save our democracy at this perilous time. So these workers are demanding a living wage. They're demanding benefits. They're demanding a voice on the job, and they want to be able to join a union. We covered that protest in Chicago, and we're going to bring you some live clips and also some fun information on that. Then later on in the show, labor reporter and good friend of mine, Bob Henley, author of this book right here, Stuck Nation. Can the United States change course on our history of choosing profits over people? The answer is maybe, if labor gets its act together. He's going to be on our program to talk about the media blackout of certain labor and organizing stories. I wonder if you have heard any of the stories that he is going to present to us today. Leave a comment, okay? I want to know how many of you who are watching, wherever you're watching, if you're watching in a place where you can leave comments, if you have heard of these stories before. All that and hopefully some more fun stuff right here on Act Now. Now, here it comes, our action rundown. All right, it was the airport workers taking action in more than 20 cities. They were gathered at airports and terminals, and they also went to the United American and Delta Airlines corporate headquarters to demand good jobs and a living wage and all that stuff that oppressed workers of corporations who are making a freaking killing right now. Did you try to get an airline ticket anytime recently? Everything is $1 billion, and that might be oil prices, or they might be using oil prices as an excuse to price gouge you more than they do by making you pay for even the one piece of baggage. You can't even bring a one piece of baggage anymore on the plane. You have to pay for every single thing that's not clothes on your back. Anyway, we covered that protest, the one happening in Chicago, in front of the United headquarters at Willis Tower. Remember, Chicago is a union town. Here's our first video of our first speaker. She is the leader of the SEIU Local Chicago, which of course would be happy to represent the Chicago airline workers. This is Jeannie Katstrup. She is speaking up about the United having a lot of money and not paying their workers a living wage. They are out front asking United to sign this thing called the Good Jobs Pledge, which guarantees some standards at least for airport workers here. Oh, by the way, before we watch this video, I want to give you a little warning. Someone sounds a siren in the middle of it. So just so you know, wherever you're watching, the cops aren't at your house, your fire alarm's not going off, everything's fine. Here's the video.
So United Airlines is on the 4th floor of Willis Tower behind us to the 28th floor. And you tell me they can't afford to pay a living wage and give people the voice on the job that they deserve? Shame on you. 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 Now, here in Local One Land, we know change at the airport is possible because we've organized over 2,000 workers and we've raised their wages. And that was because we used our political power and our people power to get it done. And we're here today, along with 20 other national airports actions that are happening all across the country, to say that enough is enough. 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 Enough is clean and guard all of these buildings that surround us, and we also play a big part in making the airports work. And United Airlines, let me be very clear. You are not going to come into our house, in Chicago's house, and be anti-union. So we demand that you sign on to our pledge today.
Who's house? Our house! Who's house? Our house! Who's house? Our house! Who's house? Our house!
A good airports pledge had a lot of good stuff in it, like healthcare, paid time off, et cetera, I believe, if I'm looking at it properly. Now, I love what she said about Chicago being a union town. Chicago is a union town. It was the town where the teachers movement union began in 1887. That was a long time ago when there weren't a lot of unions. Immigrant workers organized the meat packing industry in the 1930s, and the demand for the 8-hour workday took root right there in Chi-Town. But of course, as union membership fell across the country, Illinois had been hard hit, actually particularly hard hit, losing the third largest number of union members in the country. I think Michigan and Ohio were the other two. But a large part of this loss isn't because people were like, I don't like unions. I think unions are corrupt. I am falling to the propaganda of the right wing. No, because they cut public sector jobs. That is why there's not as many union people. They cut people's jobs. People didn't just leave the union. Their good paying union job got taken from them as neoliberal economic policies pushed by both parties moved austerity measures forward and cut jobs from the private or the public sector. Now, these good folks have to get jobs in the private sector, who, as we all know, is motivated by ever increasing fiduciary obligations to investors, aka just like the excuse for just going for more and more profit, even when it literally means squeezing the lifeblood from the people who keep your company working. But anyway, I just also want to say it's not the numbers that make Chicago a union town. It's a union town by culture. Okay. Da Bears. That's where they got this. Da Bears. They didn't, Saturday Night Live back then did not just make up this. It was, those were real people they based it on. And I know, because I used to live there. And also, Chicago has that old ass Wrigley Field. I took this picture last week. It still looks exactly like that. And Chicago has sausage everywhere. Kielbasa is like on sale at Starbucks over there. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm dying. Let's go to the second video and I'll talk about it in a minute.
Their actions today that happened all along the East Coast, from JFK down to Miami, where airport workers stand in solidarity with the workers here in Chicago to say, no mas, no more. Corporate greed has got to end. United has to raise wages and provide health care and living benefits to all airport workers at O'Hare. Are we going to make that happen? Yeah! And we have a worker who does baggage handling in Orlando that traveled to Chicago today. Jackson Reed, who stands in solidarity with our demands on the United CEO. He better come to his senses and sign the Good Jobs Pledge.
Okay, this was this was Mary Kay Henry. She's the leader of the SEIU National. She mentions protests across the country and just, gave the message of unity that United has to raise wages and provide health care and that all of the workers are standing in solidarity. But I want to point out one thing. Take a look at this woman. John Carl, put up the image. Take a look. She is the woman from Orlando who came to stand in solidarity. She is freezing her tuchus off. I have to tell you, I lived in Chicago for quite some time. The coldest I've ever been. I was literally standing with long underwear on underneath my clothes, underneath a very hard, like big REI coat or one of those puffy coats, underneath the heated lamps on the outdoor subway platform. And I thought I was going to die. That wind off that lake, forget it. So she is really doing a service for her fellow airport workers. That one person who came, that means a lot. It means a lot. Sarah Nelson, She has been on the show here a couple times. No, that's Mother Jones. We're going to the next video. Sarah Nelson talked about workers' rights also being women's rights. She talked about Mother Jones. Let's listen to her video, and then I'll put up a cool quote.
If Ken Diaz, who is the president of the Association of Flight Attendants, and goes into this tower and negotiates with United Airlines and will say to their face right after this rally, you gotta sign the Good Airports Pledge. Now, come on, Scott Kirby. Come on, say to their face right after.
Just stick with us. I know that the sound is a little like blowing out the speaker, but this is like a live event. So she is like yelling at hundreds of people in the street. So here it is.
After this rally, you gotta sign the Good Airports Pledge. Now, come on, Scott Kirby. Come on, Scott Kirby. I know you love to be first. Sign first. Now also, I gotta tell you, it is an extreme pleasure to go to a labor rally and stand up with labor women who are the presidents representing the workers across the country. The great Mother Jones, labor organizer, would always say, the corporate thieves made the ladies, but God Almighty made women. And women of this rally here today are here to stay. We are standing here demanding our rights as women. Now, Mother Jones also said that the workers create all the power, all the wealth, all the palaces in this country. But we neither spend the wealth nor dwell in the palaces. But she also said, if you would only understand that you hold the solution to the problem in your hands. For if every single worker in every single industry were to simply hold up and join together and peacefully put their hands in their pockets, the corporations would settle for all of our demands because the world could not go on.
She is calling for a general strike. That's the president of the Association for Flight Attendants, one of the largest unions here in our country. I love that she brought up Mother Jones. Let's put up this cool image, and props to Giancarlo, our editor, for making this cool image. God Almighty, this is the quote. She said, God Almighty, the real quote is, God Almighty made women, and the Rockefeller gang of thieves made ladies. I love how she talked about the oppression. We get this, what this quote is about, right? That the people who are the gang of thieves, the oppressors, want you to be a lady, want you to keep your mouth shut. It's not polite for you to speak up and blah, 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 insert bullshit here. But she was not having it. And I love that. By the way, if you don't know who Mother Jones is, she's the most famous female labor activist, second only now to Sarah Nelson, who might be the head of the SEIU at some point. I don't know. We'll have to see. She's already pretty powerful with what she's already doing. Mother Jones was in the 19th century. Her real name was Mary Harris Jones. She was a self-proclaimed hellraiser for economic justice. She was very strident, so strident that a U.S. attorney once labeled her the most dangerous woman in America. She came from Ireland, Cork, I believe. And she went to Toronto, Canada first. And I believe she was age 5 but it was before the potato famine, which ravaged the Irish people. And she worked as a teacher in a Michigan Catholic school, which you can see right on her face. She has the absolute look of a Catholic school teacher and a labor leader. God bless her. I love her. In Chicago, she did sewing, but she lost everything she owned in that big fire that they had there. And the Knights of Labor meeting took her in, and then she took up the cause to fight for the working poor, and her work lives on in both memory and in inspiration to folks around the country. And Sarah Nelson quoted her, and I thought that was pretty awesome. We also have, now let's get to some of the workers. Okay. Stefan Medina is an airport worker who explains his situation, making very little money. But by the way, he's making almost twice as much where he is than some of the people he's standing in solidarity with. And it's still really just not enough. He's supporting his sick mother who has medical bills piling up. He says he's done everything right, which don't we all feel that way? We did everything right. And why don't we deserve a living wage? This is a question that people have. This is Stefan Medina speaking to us from the Chicago action that happened yesterday.
Hello everyone, my name is Stefan Medina and I'm a PSA at Chicago O'Hare Airport and a proud Local 1 member. Contracted airport workers like me are coming together all across the country to say, united in one voice, that we demand good jobs, good airports, and unions for all. Right now, I am awake before the sun rises to commute 1.5 hours each way to and from the airport for where a job where I am paid $15.25 an hour. While I am grateful for an income, it is hardly enough for me to get by. I have to pay rent, pay for gas, electricity and heating in the cold Chicago winters, make student loan payments, and I'm expected to save for the future. On top of myself, I'm responsible for providing for my mother. My mom means everything to me. She taught me to fight for what I believe in.
That's right. Make some noise. Yeah. Yeah.
For the past 20 years, my mom has been sick with sporadic seizures and medical bills pile up. Although I am tight on money, I will always help to support her. This isn't a reality for everyone in my position. PSAs like me across the country are making as low as $8 an hour. Having to choose between a bill or providing for loved ones. Everyone deserves to be paid a livable wage and compensated fairly for their work. $8 an hour is not going to cut it.
No, it's not.
So while I stand here expressing my own hardships, I know others may have it worse. We need a federal wage that allows us essential airport workers to thrive, not to survive.
$8 an hour. $8 an hour. And he has to drive an hour and a half in order to get to work. The gas is $4 a gallon. He has to work hours. I know he's getting 15, but some of the other ones. By the way, he said he's a passenger service assistant. That's a customer service representative, the kind of person who helps you using any kind of transportation service. A lot of them work on the ground for the airlines. Some people do it at cruise lines, trains lines. They basically help, they're the kind of folks, sometimes they help with your luggage. Sometimes they help with just getting things from one side to the other. And sometimes they push your elderly mother from one station to, from across the terminal. That I had a really bad experience there once. And I have a feeling it was because the person was exhausted, maybe not well, and still had to push an elderly woman across the terminals. It wasn't good. Let me just say, these people deserve to be paid well. Now, this kind of action has been going on for a long time. Airport workers have been trying to unionize for years. And you'll see, I actually pulled up a video from when I went to Newark Airport, and they were standing in solidarity with some of these airport workers. This was before, pre-pandemic. You'll see my pre-pandemic hairdo, which I was like, gee, maybe I'll do that again once I, and the video shows that it was so old, just how long these folks have been fighting for like a livable wage when their companies are making so much money. So take a look at this video. We're speaking to one of the workers. This is me interviewing one of the airport workers. We're at Newark Airport for the International Airport Workers Day of Action. And down here at Newark, we found a worker from the Boston Airport. Can you talk about what's going on for workers' rights in the Boston Airport?
So in Boston, it's kind of like Newark. I mean, we have companies working for the same airlines, doing the same kind of work. People are no benefits, no job security, very abusive working conditions. So people are fighting back against that, just as here. So we're here in solidarity with the Newark Airport because they've just won a big wage increase here, and that's where we want to go in Boston.
Can you talk about the abuses that airport workers are having to put up with? We've talked a lot about not having a living wage, not being able to pay rent on a full-time job. But beyond that, can you talk a little bit about what it is to work within, what are the abuses that we're talking about so people understand?
So there's been so many, but people have had a lot of wage theft in Boston. For example, people make uniform deposits, they never get them back. People get their paychecks being wrong. And these are people making minimum wage, a lot of them part-time, and it's not like people can afford to lose money. And so there's been tremendous amount of wage theft. A lot of companies have been caught and paid fines, but the problems continue. There have been.
Do you think the fines are commensurate with the amount of money they're making by stealing people's wages?
Well, no, I mean, that's why they continue to do it, because they can make so much money at the airport. There have been a number of cases this year. Women have filed cases for sexual harassment against their employers, and that continues to happen as more people hear about it and come forward. There have been several companies in Boston that have been caught breaking labor laws. People have been fired, and some of them we've forced the companies to put them back to work. But it's a race to the bottom. That's the problem, is the companies find that they can make more money by competing to be cheaper, and part of that means cutting corners, stealing wages, and breaking the law.
Do you remember when companies used to try to provide a nice service so that people would, say, oh, I really like flying on United because the service is great and everyone's happy and they never lose my bag, and I'm going to stick with United because of that? Do you remember those days?
I do. I'm old enough to remember that.
When they went for quality in order to secure their customer base instead of just slash and burn.
Well, it's interesting. The people who push wheelchairs and move baggage and do passenger service used to work for the airlines, most of them. So people had flight privileges, and they weren't high-wage jobs, but they were decent jobs. But what the airlines have found is that this is another way to save money.
Oh, so basically they're contracting it out, and then the contracting corporations are doing all of this wage theft and all of that stuff.
That's right.
Wow, so that's very Machiavellian of them.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, it seems like so many.
You can't hold them accountable if they're not doing it. They can say, oh, well, this middleman is the evil guy.
Yeah, so many industries in our economy now have done that, and so the people who suffer are the people who are doing the work every day and actually make the airport run. If it wasn't for people doing these jobs, the airport wouldn't function.
How do you find the people's attitudes toward the union these days? I know we had some, and that'll be my last question.
Yeah, people are excited about the union. I think people see the union as the way that they can make their jobs better and make their families more secure in this, with Trump in the White House and with the airlines doing contracting. The union is a place that people have hope that they can make it better.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that was before the pandemic. The interesting part is that now all of those workers who do that handling of bags, pushing of wheelchairs, helping people this way, are contracted. How convenient for the airlines who don't have to pay healthcare benefits. And they don't even, if they're not doing the wage theft, they don't have to be responsible for it. It's just really sickening. And these people are actually putting themselves on the front lines and risking their lives for COVID. Another video I have from one of the last action that happened. That action also happened in cities across the country. One of which was in LA. We have my friend Jackie Copel, who I haven't seen in forever. So we used to both have little segments on the Young Turks Network together at the same time. And now she's out in LA and I'm here on the East Coast outside of New York, and almost never the twain shall meet. But anyway, Jackie did this great interview with one of the workers there. I think it's very interesting. Take a look.
Hi, it's Jackie Copel, and I'm here with Tim Maddox, spokesperson for the workers at LAX. Can you tell us what's happening at LAX today?
Well, at LAX, we're standing up for good union jobs so we can take care of ourselves and our families. Today is a global action of airport workers all around the world. So airport workers are standing up around the world to demand that the airlines, who are making billions of dollars of profit, make these jobs good jobs for our communities.
And you guys were here especially at American Airlines. Why the focus on American?
Well, American Airlines and airlines like Southwest have began to get rid of some of the things that we fought for by going with irresponsible contractors and lowering our standards and taking back some of the things that we won in our fight here at the airport.
So essentially using non-union workers, is that right?
Yes, using non-union workers, and those former workers had a collective bargaining agreement which included health care, family health care, and wages, and now they're being undermined by companies like Southwest, and American in particular have taken workers back.
You said this is a global day of action. Where else is this action? I know folks are watching perhaps on the live stream, but where else is this action happening around the world?
In some 40 different airports around the world, and 13 different countries. People will be standing up and together for good jobs at airports. There are all kind of studies that say that some airport workers have either been food insecurity or homeless due to low wages and living in a city like Los Angeles, where the cost of rent and living is really, really expensive.
So you're out to, as you can see, the action just started. So what you're out to create really is to have these jobs be union jobs once again, so that the workers can have a life, can pay for their food, for their housing, etc.
Yes, that's what we want. We want to be able to come to work with have some respect and dignity. We work in a multi-billion-dollar industry, and we provide services for millions of passengers every week, every day, and so we're making massive profits. So the airlines need to invest back into the communities by providing good jobs for us.
And so is there anything that the folks at home and those watching can do to support today's action and then just the action in general in the long term?
Well, yes, I think they can. They're consumers of the airlines. People use them to visit their loved ones and travel for business. They should say, or they're right, American Airlines or Southwest Airlines, and support the workers that do the work, that keep clean the planes, that keep the airlines safe, guard the planes, and for the workers, for the passengers.
So they make our lives better and safer, and our job is to make their lives better and safer.
Yeah.
Awesome. So for those watching at home, write to American Airlines, write to Southwest, and demand that they make their workers or hire union workers so that everyone has a better life.
Well, that is a great idea. I think I am going to write a letter right now. Let's see. Dear American, we would prefer if your airport workers didn't give us COVID because they were forced to come to work because they could not afford to take a sick day. We would like it if they weren't exhausted when pushing our disabled elderly parents across Terminal 3, and we would like them to make a living wage, be able to work 40 hours a week and afford food and have health care benefits. We know you are the same corporations who are lobbying against Medicare for all, yet you don't want to pay and give benefits to workers. What is your end game? Please give them the benefits they seek. Also, have you found my luggage yet from that trip I took to Cleveland in 1993? It is black with a red bow. Anyway, you could do for reals. You could work. You could send a letter to the airports, to United, to Southwest, to American, and help those people get the job done. Coming up next, we have an interview with Bob Henley from the laborpress.org from Salon, and he is the author of this book right here, Stuck Nation. We're going to be talking to him about a media blackout of labor stories and the stories that you have not heard. As I said up front, if you have heard these stories anywhere, please put them in the comments. I want to see if you actually have heard these stories before. He's coming up next. Stay tuned. As I live and breathe, Bob Henley live here with me today. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Well, Bob, you are a labor reporter, and as such, you have chosen a profession that marginalizes you to the edge of the edge of the media landscape. You and I were talking before this interview, and I said we're going to be covering the airport thing. You brought up like several right. stories that people really have not heard of. So why don't you just hit me with
sure.
What you
had the pleasure and honor of being down in Washington, D.C. at the American Federation of Government Employees Union, which represents around 700,000 federal employees that work from everywhere from the EPA to the Veterans Administration, TSA, Bureau of Prisons. That's a big chunk of the 2 million people that work for the federal government. And they had not had an in-person meeting, of course, since the pandemic started. And so I would have to say there was a wonderful reporter, Mr. Davidson from the Washington Post, 2 folks from a fairly obscure radio outlet, and then I think one other internet person and myself that I could see that were covering it. Now, at this event, what we learned from Dr. Everett Kelly, who's president of the AFGE, is that they estimate at least 600 federal civil service workers died of COVID, with many of them succumbing to occupational exposure. That number is just a baseline. That there are any number that are dealing with long-term haul COVID issues. And that the federal government and the bureaucracies, particularly during the Trump administration, really fought disclosure of this. And it's very important to understand that in real time, what we had here was the Trump administration when TSA officers died, and the first ones were in California when a flight came from England to California, to Northern California. They fell ill. And from the very beginning, the Trump administration resisted disclosure, made it hard to get the basic PPE in place, and did not let the union advance contact tracing. That action was repeated throughout the federal civil service. And in the process, the Trump administration added significantly to the body count and helped spread the infectious disease that's had this country on its knees for quite a while now. And we saw this most graphically with what happened with the meat processing facilities. With Rachel Maddow did a good job in some local papers in the Midwest. In that case, the president, who was reluctant to use the Warfare Act to create PPE, which was rationed, instead he used it as a way to give the meat processors a kind of immunity and made it possible for them to actually act in contrary advice of the local health officials. And as a result, hundreds of meat processing workers died, and among them were USDA food inspectors.
Wait,
This
so I
story
feel like we
has
have
been
heard.
buried.
Oh, tell me. Yes.
I'm finished for now.
I feel like we. Oh, you're finished. Excuse me. I feel like we did hear about what happened in the meat packing, because of Rachel and
Right.
others who were covering it, and how important unions were. They had a moment in the sun during COVID because they were organizing against these terrible labor practices. But you're saying that these numbers have never been published. The
Right.
ones
No,
that just
and as a
came out
matter
now.
of fact, today, the United States has no registry or count of how many of the close to 1 million Americans died as a consequence of their service as essential workers. And so what we have here is a country and the economy, thanks to large corporations, marching on, oblivious to the fact that the government and corporations let down the American worker in a dramatic fashion with deadly consequences. And the reason why it's important to track this is if we do not get a sense of where people were exposed, it's impossible to prepare for either another deadly variant or another pandemic, which experts tell us is not a matter of if, but when.
Oh, no, they don't care. I mean,
Exactly.
where I live, they're like, they don't need masks in school, even though cases are going up. The people don't want the mask, and we're not going to do contact tracing, and it's all over. If you get
Right.
it, it's on you. Yeah.
So I would say the other thing here is that what we have is a situation where you have also, we know 50% of the people that had an exposure to COVID and had an infection will have some kind of lingering consequence of varying severity, some not severe. But we're already seeing instances where those heroes that we bang pots for are finding themselves disabled and need worker compensation. And depending on the state where they're in and their employer, in some cases, the employers that ordered them to work and had them work forced overtime are now fighting their workers' comp claim, because in the United States, there are 50 different state approaches to this. Now, federal workers have a presumption, but for instance, in the New York region, New Jersey has a worker presumption. So if you are a nurse, you have a better shot at getting it. Although here, also, New Jersey was one of the deadliest places on the earth in terms of the per capita death rate. We have cases where hospitals are actually fighting the claim. So we say that we're concerned about healthcare workers, but actually the government does not have their back. We know, for instance, the only comprehensive survey that was done was an important investigative project by the Guardian newspaper and Kaiser Health News, which tracked in the first year of the pandemic some 3,600 healthcare workers that died of an occupational exposure to COVID, and most of them, surprise, surprise, were people of color.
Bob, are the unions in their various areas? You mentioned healthcare workers. We've also got teachers. We've got transit workers, et cetera. Are the unions trying to work toward helping their members get workers' comp?
Well, yeah, most importantly, they are. And often unions will have lawyers that are familiar with this work. But one of the things that the unions have tried to do is to track anecdotally the death toll. So like different unions have done a better job. CWA has done a pretty good job. And if you go to the website, you'll see an memoriam list. But there was a very big win. The AFL-CIO just had a big win in the last budget authorization, which was another underreported story, where the CDC has to, within 6 months, come up with a comprehensive occupational analysis of which people and which jobs succumb to COVID and which industries and in what different kinds of settings did that happen in. That's essential, because what we're going to have here is people that are familiar with 9/11 World Trade Center crisis know that in 9/11, we had the EPA saying the air was safe to breathe. They wanted to open up Wall Street. We now know the air was very toxic, and that more people have died from the occupational exposure from working down there than actually died the day of the attack. Some 80 to 90,000 people are part of the World Trade Center health program. And we still don't fully understand the impacts of that. This is a very similar situation. Long COVID is still not fully understood. It's not mapped by any degree. And so we're seeing symptoms that range from lingering cardiovascular issues, brain fog, respiratory complications. And so it's very important, if we want to support the healthcare workforce, that we have a worker comp system that matches the challenge, because many of these people can get back to work, and we know we're going to need healthcare workers.
I have brain fog, and I didn't have COVID as far as I know. I just think the pandemic gave us all brain fog in general. It's very catchy, even if you don't catch the Rona. Not to make light here, but what other stories do you think, what stories do you think it would be awesome to see covered on the mainstream media? And what effects do you think they would have if labor started to really become part of the fabric of even MSNBC, which, you know, is supposed to be on the left?
Well, I think that part of the problem is that the hottest front right now, for one of the hottest fronts for labor organizing, is the media itself. It's very important to understand that over the last few years, the consolidation of outfits like Gannett, which owns 1 in 5 local papers, the corporate model is to buy up your local newspaper, to strip it of its assets, to lay off the reporters, and then aggregate content. So one reporter writes a story that appears across the country, they get paid poor wages. So, I mean, it's important to understand, to get our arms around what's happening in this industry. When I was working my first AFTRA equity contract as a radio reporter in 1999 and 2000 was $48,000 a year. I just wrapped up an assignment with the chief leader where I was getting $45,000 like 2 generations later. Yeah. So when I was at the Village Voice, I received $1 a word, and we were represented by the United Auto Workers. Today, when you write, generally it's like 10 cents a word. Your stories are aggregated, and you see no participation for it after you've gotten your $150 or $200 fee. So what's happened is we have a collapse of authenticated news. What we have is some very large media organizations which program to the biases of the people they're trying to reach. Mm-hmm. It's not independent news gathering. Yes, we have some giants out there, like the New York Times, like the Washington Post. But as far as local news, like the kind of important news that we saw broke by those brave papers out in the Midwest about what was happening in meatpacking plants, for the most part, local media, news media, that is where people ask the critical question, how do you know what you know, has been eviscerated.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, if anyone's watching, just put in the comments, how do you get your local news? I mean, I know a lot of people who still have cable watch local news at 5 o'clock. I mean, you have to like be at home at 5 to watch. It's just insane. I mean, people, you know, so put in the comments, where do you get local news? Do you know what's going on with your local government, your school board? Do you know what's going on, you know, with the COVID number? Do you know what's going on literally in your local town? And by local, even if you're in New York City watching, put like Brooklyn. You know, do you know like what's happening in Cobble Hill, your neighborhood? Where do you get this information? It's crazy. You're right.
Well, I'll give you one example of where there's a major story that I did a lot with, but I think it's underreported. Right now, as we speak, there are 5 million households in the United States, primarily composed of single parents, who have not collected the expanded child tax credit that was approved last year. That is to say, there's $14 billion sitting in the U.S. Treasury now that struggling moms and dads have not accessed. That means like $3,600.
Why is that? Why?
Well, because what happens is the debate in Washington is at 10,000 feet. They'll debate over extending the child tax care credit, but quite frankly, they don't really care if anybody actually applies for it. They want the talking point. Mm. And the work of finding out why people aren't getting this is basically digging deep and basic community organizing. One of the things that when you speak with people that are doing nonprofit tax preparation, that's a very important thing right now. People should know that the United Way has online, they have a project called Alice, and it follows people that are struggling parents in terms of they're not living below the poverty line. These are people that have to choose each month to rotate out the car payment or childcare, and then have a nice tap dance for the person looking for the money.
Yeah.
In much of the United States, that's as much as 35 to 40% of the population. In fact, if you add the people struggling below poverty and the people in this Alice category, in many places, that's the majority of the people in that town, city, or county. And so the reality is those folks are too busy to engage in politics. A lot of times, for instance, they don't have direct deposit. A lot of times they are so traumatized by what it takes to work the 3 jobs cleaning hotel rooms to survive that they just can't figure out how to get a direct deposit from the IRS. Moreover, they may not even have a bank. They may be so. Working people have been at such a disadvantage for so long, and the ruling class has been so disinterested in their people's actual circumstance that we have this deterioration. I think it's instructive to notice.
When is it going to hit the working? I'm sorry to cut you off. When is it going to hit the working class? When is it going to hit the ruling class? Like, we're all one. And eventually, when the working class is destroyed and the middle class who have lawyers or who have, the middle class starts getting more mad because they're starting to become, lower down on the food chain. When does it actually hit those people that they actually needed us in the first place to run their companies?
Well, it's happening now in the form of the Great Resignation. And so one of the things that I think since September, we know close to 20 million Americans have left their job. That's visible from space. I mean, that is 8 million people, 7.5 million more people.
Maybe that's why Elon Musk went up there to see where the hell the people went who all
that's bigger than the American labor movement and the AFL-CIO by about 7 million. And where
do these people go, Bob?
Well, they're finding other arrangements. They're reprioritizing their life. We have seen people are tearing up the social contract about work, and it's really upsetting Wall Street.
It's really not worth it to work for $8 an hour.
Precisely. That is.
You might as well just move back in with your sister, and you can, you know what I mean? You can both share some sort of.
The reality is that during the pandemic, in a scale that has not been seen in modern memory, the government and private employers let down the working class catastrophically, and people died in large numbers. And so I found out, for instance, down at the AFG conference, that there was a plan that was passed during the Trump administration to actually look at the VA at a hospital system and perhaps downsize it. And that plan is still going forward. So in the middle of a mass death event where we don't even have the full excess mortality numbers, we're contemplating downsizing one of the most critical parts of America's healthcare system. We are not looking at the fact, for instance, that the healthcare system in places in rural areas and urban areas was already in a steep decline when the pandemic hit. We had already seen life expectancy decline 3 years in a row before the pandemic. Indeed, I will tell you, it's America's sick healthcare system. It's for-profit healthcare system that was the deadly precondition for the pandemic.
Absolutely. Bob, at the beginning of this show, we covered the action that happened at the 20 airports across the country, with the airport and also at the headquarters of the major airlines. We covered the airport workers and the SEIU action there. I'd love to get your comments on that particular issue that's going on and your thoughts about their movement.
Well, I would say that we have seen SEIU really take a leadership here in terms of organizing a broad working class and also really be innovative with reaching out to the undocumented community. One of the things that has been a problem historically in the labor movement is that it's used against people if they don't have legal paperwork. And the way our economy works is that because they are undocumented, unscrupulous employers use that against them. It's instructive to keep in mind that we have just we finished the anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, March 25th, 1911. Imagine before that fire resulted in 146 mostly young immigrant women dying. Before that happened, 2 years before that, over 20,000 primarily young immigrant women went on a general strike and shut down that entire industry and got major gains as a consequence. We don't hear about that story unless you follow labor. It's not generally taught in high school. And so we're at that kind of moment now where collective action, like you're seeing at the airport, particularly when what we're talking about, every place is potentially in a pandemic is a triangle shirt fire. During a pandemic, we had these frontline essential workers bore the heaviest price that we took for granted. And so it makes sense now that after coming out of the traumatic events that they organized, because the places that were organized were better protected. The places where there were unions, they got PPE. The places where they weren't, they didn't.
This is fascinating, Bob. You're giving me an idea of, I have a little one and I've been following. She's learning to read. We're going to the library, and you do see that there's, at least if you live in a place where the librarian herself has agency to choose which books to put in the library,
right,
where like I do, luckily, even though we're in a kind of a red zone here. You see, the librarian reads and she knows accurate history. So she somehow has she desires to push that forward. But they have a lot of children's books that are, detailing even, some of the labor leaders, some of the female labor leaders, that kind of thing, which is very interesting. I don't remember that from when I was a kid, but I'm wondering if there's a space for writing a textbook, not inserting labor history into someone else's textbook, because you'll never get through Texas. That's where they make all these textbooks. They're still trying to get evolution in those textbooks, but a textbook for young people as they start to understand. We could have critical labor theory starting to teach in kindergarten, and we could make an uproar across the country. What do you think, Bob?
I would say the idea of teaching collective action is essential. And that's the thing that I would say gets in the way of people being able to actualize. And so in an environment where people don't feel like they have power, they're left individually, and it's much easier for management to exploit their fears and anxiety in a predator economy. And that's where we're in.
Absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much, Bob Henley, author of this book right over here. No, don't make it big. No, we can see it.
At Stuck Nation. That's my Twitter handle too.
I also have this book. It's that book and this book right here. Look, I got a signed. No, it's not signed, Bob. Can you please put your pen through the computer?
I will. I promise.
All right. Thank you so much for being on the program. I appreciate it so much.
Bye.
You can follow Bob's work at salon.com, and he is at laborpress.org, and he is on the Twitters at Stuck Nation. We tweeted out this from ActTV. So with his tags, so you can just go there and click, follow, etc. And, maybe share the show, because as you've heard, no one's covering labor. All right. And labor is obviously one of the most important things that could stop the flow of democracy. The decline of democracy. I see we only have a few minutes left. I wanted to play you a video of Chris Hedges where he talks about that labor is the thing. Organized labor, the joining of organized labor movements, making new unions if you need to, like the Amazon union. That is really the lever of power we need to push if we want to strengthen our very, very weak democracy. Put your comments in the box. Thank you so much. We are on once a week right now, just for right now. Not sure how long that's going to last, but we are on Thursdays at 1:00. So if you notice that we started early today, you were right. Again, reset your calendars. This is not just a function of the Eastern time zone being changed to fall back, spring forward, etc. This is our new time, 1 Eastern, or you can watch the reruns on ActTV's YouTube page. You can follow me over at Twitter for non-ActTV fun things, Julianna Forlano, or I'm on YouTube at Julianna Forlano Live, where I sometimes go Julianna Forlano Live if you would like me to talk about more cultural things and other things. That's what I do over there. Thanks so much for watching. We appreciate you so much, and we will see you next time.